nice to meet all of you guys. I'm really excited to spend the next hour with you here with on the Temple Mount in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. I'm going to tell you all about what it is in just a quick second. But before we get started, I want to set a few ground rules together. So first of all, my name is Josh. I'm originally from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. So just around the corner from you guys in Beth David. And I made Aliyah. I moved to Israel in 2011. So a really long time ago already for some of you guys, for some other ones. So 2011 is just last year, but you know, that's a few of the other people here. Anyway, so I moved to Israel in 2011 and I live in Tel Aviv, which is one of the most important cities in Israel, but we're going to be visiting the most important city in Israel, which is Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. And as we're going to be doing the tour together, I might be mentioning a few different terms. And I'm going to be trying to make sure that everyone's on the same plane, everyone's on the same level the whole way. But if you have any questions, make sure that you write it in the chat. If you write it in the chat and it's a quick one-sentence answer, I'm happy to answer it right then and there so everyone can hear. If you have a question that's like really burning inside you that you really need to ask, then unmute yourself and you can jump right in and you can ask away. If you have a question that is more general, that might relate to a few different things, write it down for yourselves. And then at the end of the tour, at the end of the time that we're together, you'll have a chance to ask those questions later and I can do the best I can to answer all of those. How does that sound to everyone? Does that sound good? Great. So if you have a question, again, throughout the thing, if I'm going too quickly or if I said something that you didn't understand, just write it in the chat or speak up, raise your hand, whatever it is, and I'll try to make sure I can get to you as quickly as possible. So great, so let's start. Let's go to where we need to be, which is Yerushalayim. So I have one of the coolest jobs in the world, which is I'm a tour guide in Israel. And my favorite thing about being a tour guide in Israel is I get to take people to my favorite places in Israel, my favorite places in the Holy Land. And unfortunately, because of everything that's going on right now in the world, I can't take people there physically, but it gives another opportunity. It gives me the chance to take you to places that you can't even go in person, including right here, right now, where we are right now, floating above Jerusalem. And you can see how Jerusalem, which is all of this on the left side, and for any of you or your parents who have been to Hebrew University, that's this blob that's over here. And you can see, oh, we're right next to a desert, right next to the Minbar Yehuda, the Judean desert. And you can see all the way pretty much to Yam HaMelach, which is just over here on the distance. Yam HaMelach, which is, what is it in English? The Dead Sea, right? For any of you guys who got that, the Dead Sea, Yam HaMelach, the Salt Sea. And now we're going to come down and get to the southern part of Yerushalayim, the southern part of Jerusalem, and take a look at the whole city. How about that view? You don't even get this in person. This is unbelievable. Look how high up we are. We can look down below us and see that we're floating above all these hotels. We're floating above the Mount of Olives, which is the holiest and the oldest cemetery for Jews in the world. It's the oldest active cemetery in the world too. And it overlooks Har HaBayit, or the Temple Mount. Now, we're going to be spending our whole time that we're together talking about this funny looking rectangle that's not even a perfect rectangle. And we're going to try to figure out why this place is so special to Jews. What's its meaning to Christians? What's its meaning to Muslims? What's going on right now? Why is it so important? Why is it such an interesting and fun place to be? And why is it so gorgeous? And what's so beautiful about it? And what's cool about the virtual tour that we're doing together is we get to actually go inside all of these really cool places. So before we get started with that, I wanted to show you what Jerusalem looks like without all of these buildings. It looks like this. It's a lot of really funny looking squiggly lines. But these squiggly lines are a special kind of map. That's called a topographical map. And this map shows where all the circles come together, close all together. That means that we're at the top of a mountain. And where the circles get big and wide, and then all of a sudden there's no more circles, that means that there's a valley that's in between. So you can see where this yellow square is on the map, the yellow square that's on this part that says TM, that is the Temple Mount. That's the yellow square that we are looking at right now. The Jewish quarter, where in the old city of Jerusalem, the Jewish quarter is this spot that's over here, and the Muslim quarter is this spot that's over here. and the Christian quarter is over here, and the Armenian quarter is this spot that's over here. So this is all Jerusalem without any of all the buildings, all the houses and everything that you can just see by turning our camera just to over there. Okay, now why do I bring that up? That's important because it's on this hill, the hill that's over here, where there's the famous story of Akedat Yitzchak. This is the story in Tanakh, in Parshat Va'era. I don't know how many of you have your bar bat mitzvah on Parshat Va'era or Parshat Lech Lecha or Chaye Sarah, the three parshiot which talk about who? Right? Avraham Avinu and Yitzchak and Sarah and Rivka and the whole famous story of Avraham about to sacrifice Yitzchak, that takes place here on the Temple Mount or Mount Moriah. And according to tradition, it takes place exactly where that golden dome is over there. And that is the beginning of why this place is really holy. But the second reason why this place is really holy, and the one that's most famous, is the Beit HaMikdash, or the temple. Now the Beit HaMikdash was first, which is this building that's over here, was first built by Melech Shlomo, the King Solomon, who is the son of King David, the one who basically builds Jerusalem. Now this map of Jerusalem I'm showing right now, this picture of Jerusalem looks very different than Jerusalem that's over here. The origins of Jerusalem is not this huge, massive city. Imagine if Toronto as this huge, massive city, but 3,000 years ago, it wasn't a huge, massive city. It would have been a little tiny spot that's on Lake Ontario. And the same thing with Jerusalem. Jerusalem, which is now all of this that you can see and so much more, used to be just this little section that's over here where my mouse is going around. And that little tiny hill is this little tiny city, where this palace that's over here is the palace of King David, of Hamelech David. And then Shlomo, the next generation later, around the year 930 BCE. So we're talking almost 3,000 years ago, built the Beit HaMikdash, this temple that's sitting up on the top over there. And that Beit HaMikdash lasts for a few hundred years until it is destroyed in 586 BCE, which is what we commemorate every Tisha B'Av. When we sing Eicha, we're commemorating the destruction of the temple, but then it is rebuilt years later. And then it's remodeled, renovated a lot later in around the year 20 BCE, so 2,000 years ago, by another king named Herod. And he builds the really, really, really famous temple that was not just famous for Jews, but it was the most famous building in the whole Roman Empire. That 2,000 years ago, this building, this funny looking rectangle with the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies in the middle, and this tall tower over here, all these things we're going to talk about a little bit later on. This building over here was the largest building in the whole Roman Empire when it was built 2,000 years ago. So it wasn't just famous and important for Jews, it was famous for the whole world. And so that square, you can see this big square that's over here, right? So this whole rectangular structure is the exact same rectangular structure that's over here. The exact same thing. Where you can see the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh HaKodashim, that is where this golden dome is that's over there. Because it was destroyed in the year 70 by the Romans. And then later on, it gets built by a few different people. There's a few different people that build a few different things on the Temple Mount. And we're going to discuss what all of those things are and what's so important about them. The other thing I want to show you is, you know what, let's just go on from there. So let's actually go onto the Temple Mount. So we're starting our tour, just to backtrack to show you where we are. We're going to start over here on this corner. If you follow my mouse of where we're going to start over here. Then we're going to go inside this building. Then we're going to come to this corner. Then we're going to slide all the way to here. Then we're going to go all the way up to there. And then we're going to walk around up on the top over here. So let's go actually onto the Temple Mount. So now we are on the southwestern corner. Now this is the only place that if you are coming to Jerusalem yourself, you are going to Yerushalayim, the only place that you're allowed to go in as a non-Muslim, because now it's controlled by the Muslim rule called the Waqif. So the Waqif, or the Muslims who rule over the Temple Mount, so only allow non-Muslims to come up on very specific times during the day and through one entrance only. And it's just tucked in over here. And what adorns this entrance is this really beautiful tower that's over here. But, sorry, when you go in, you get to see the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. And these are the two most important buildings. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is this one with a black dome that I'm going to show you in just a second. And the golden dome is called the Dome of the Rock. And we're going to talk about why these things got those names and what's so important about them. So now we're standing in front of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So what does Al-Aqsa mean? And this just show how beautiful the front of it is. So what does the word Al-Aqsa mean? So Aqsa kind of sounds like a Hebrew word. So the Hebrew word it kind of sounds like is the word katzeh. Does anyone know what the word katzeh means? There's a famous Israeli song like the Ata tegale ta'olam min hakatzeh el hakatzeh, from one side until the other side. So katzeh means on the edge or on the side. And so Al-Aqsa means the mosque that's on the edge. And that's going to become important. I'm going to tell you about why that's important in just a second. Now there's a tradition in front of a mosque. You always have to have a fountain, because for Muslims, before they go in to pray at a mosque is like a synagogue for Muslims. So before a Muslim goes in to pray, they first wash their feet. They sit on one of these little stools and they wash their feet in front over here. And this fountain is almost 1,000 years old. This fountain is incredibly, incredibly old, and it's still in such good condition with all this really beautiful marble. And you can see straight ahead of us is that beautiful golden dome, the Dome of the Rock, the place that the Holy of Holies once was. Now, if we were going up here, if I was taking you up to the Temple Mount, if I took you up here to what Muslims called Haram Al-Sharif and what Jews call the Temple Mount, we wouldn't be allowed to go inside this building. We wouldn't even be allowed to go inside this building. But we're going to go inside because now we're going inside virtually. Look at this huge, massive mosque. This is the largest mosque in all of Israel. You can see on the red carpets down below, you can see that all the carpets, first of all, there's very few seats. That the way that Muslims pray, they don't pray in chairs and in benches like we do at Beth David or shul you might go to. You pray by going on your hands and knees. You go on the ground to pray towards Mecca, which is, Jews face towards Jerusalem. We face towards this spot in Jerusalem. But for Muslims, they don't pray towards Jerusalem. They pray towards Mecca, which is the holy city for Muslims. And these arrows that are on the carpet, those all point towards Mecca. And Mecca is in a place that's called Saudi Arabia, which is to the south of Israel. So instead of facing towards the golden Dome of the Rock, which is north, they face south towards Mecca. And the way that you know in a mosque which direction you're facing, even if there's no arrows, anytime you see a little niche, a little kind of miniature cave that's in a wall, it's called a mihrab. And that always points towards Mecca as well. So what's really cool about being inside this mosque is we get to see how beautiful the dome is on the inside. You're like, hey, wait, Josh, it doesn't look so beautiful. It's all brown and gross looking. But guess what? Boom! This is what it looks like when there's light and when you're actually there. It's all this gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous geometric patterns and all of the amazing beauty that's inside of it. Now, for Muslims, there's a tradition to not draw pictures of people or animals or landscapes the way that you would used to in a shul that, like in Beth David behind the Aron Kodesh, there's the stained glass that shows people and shows images of different things. But for Muslims, you're not allowed to have those kinds of images. So the artists, they want to show off how good they are as artists still. So they make these beautiful geometric patterns that incorporate different styles from across the Muslim world. And they write in Arabic in a really beautiful way called calligraphy. And they use the calligraphy not just as a form to write prayers and write songs, but to adorn the beautiful mosque, to make it really beautiful looking. And then the last story that I'm going to show you from this spot over here is what this thing is. Now for Muslims, there's a tradition that on Fridays, the Friday morning is the main important prayer. Kind of like on Shabbat morning for Jews, everyone goes to shul on Shabbat morning, or a lot of people go to shul on Shabbat morning. So for Muslims, it's Friday morning. And the most important thing that happens on the Friday morning prayer is that the imam, the rabbi of the mosque, called the imam, goes up to the top of a little pulpit, goes onto this kind of thing, which is like the bima for shuls, and gives a speech. Now, for this pulpit, this minbar is what it's called. Now, this one is a really famous one, but it's only famous because it's not really that good looking. And the reason why it's not good looking is because it replaced one that was incredible looking. And the one that was before it was actually destroyed by someone. And there was a tourist who came to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in 1969 and burnt down the minbar. The person destroyed the minbar, which had been a minbar that was there since the year 1187, which was a really important year for Israel, because that was the year that the Crusaders, the Christian Crusaders who had conquered the land for 87 years, but this was finally, the Muslims were able to conquer it back from them. We're not going to get into that whole story there, but it's built by the person who conquered Jerusalem and conquered Israel back from the Crusaders. And when it was destroyed in 1969, everyone was absolutely devastated because it was such an ancient, beautiful minbar. And you can see it, it's the exact, basically everything else looks exactly the same. Now let's go to a different part of the mosque. Sorry, 1 second. It's just being a bit slow to load up. Sorry about that, everyone. Does anyone have any questions so far? I'm sure a lot of you guys have a million questions and there's a lot of things going on right now. Does anyone have any questions so far? If you have a question, you can unmute yourself and you can ask away. It's a good time while this is all loading up anyways. Anyone have a question? Or you can write in the chat if you have a question. I can't see all of you actually because I have a limited view on everything because I'm mostly focusing on showing you all the images here. So if you have a question, you can feel free to write it in the chat. So here's another view of what the mosque looks like on a holiday called Ramadan. Now, Ramadan is the holiday, the most important 40-day holiday that Muslims are celebrating right now, where they fast all day during the day. And right now, Ramadan is, it's in April and May when the weather is okay. But when it's in the summer, it is really, really hot. And so they have to go to a place where there's a lot of air conditioning. And so they go into a place like the Al-Aqsa Mosque and they can relax for a little bit of time. So it's not just used as a mosque to pray in, but it's also used for relaxing. So there's a question that was asked, which is the question I'm about to answer right now, which is why was the mosque built on the Temple Mount? Now that is a great question. So it all has to do with where we're standing right now. So if we look back where we were before, where we were floating up above, we were floating from just above over here. This is where we were, where the mouse is over there, above that cemetery. And now we are on the southeast corner of the Temple Mount. And you'll notice, again, it doesn't look like the Beit HaMikdash from Shlomo, and it doesn't look like the Beit HaMikdash that Herod built in the year 20 BCE from 2,000 years ago. These are very famous Muslim buildings, but where's the Jewish buildings? So let's go back in time a little bit. The year is 638. So we're talking around 1,500 years ago, 1,400 years ago, the year 638. And Islam, the new upstart religion from Saudi Arabia, conquers much of the world, North Africa, and a lot of the Middle East, including Israel. Oh, how did you come up by the photos since Jews aren't allowed to go to the Temple? Because Muslims can take them. Muslims can take the photos, so that's how we have them. So when the conqueror Omar ibn Khattab comes to Jerusalem, he goes to the people who live in Jerusalem, which at that time was Christians, and he says, hey, Christians, can you go and take me to the famous Temple of Solomon? And they say, sure. And they don't take him to the Temple of Solomon because the Temple of Solomon doesn't exist anymore. It had been destroyed long ago. So they take him to the holiest site for Christians, which is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But then the Muslims say, well, that's not the way the temple was, and goes to a local Jewish traveler, a Jewish person who lived in Jerusalem, says, can you take me to the temple in Jerusalem? And they take Omar ibn Khattab to the Temple Mount. And they take him over here, and there's nothing here. The whole place was a garbage dump, a literal garbage dump. The Christians, before the Muslims had come, had turned the Temple Mount into a complete wreck because they didn't want the temple to be rebuilt. And they wanted Jews to know the temple will never be rebuilt, and that Christianity has taken the place of Jerusalem. And so when Omar ibn Khattab comes to the Temple Mount, Solomon is very holy for Muslims as well. And Jerusalem is a holy city for Muslims too. The reason why Jerusalem is a holy city for Muslims is because Muhammad, who founds the religion, so he first, when he's figuring out where Muslims should pray to, this is in the year 620, he says, oh, we should pray to Jerusalem the way that the Jews do. In 2 years, Muslims prayed towards Jerusalem. And even though after those 2 years, he changes it to Mecca to unite the Arabian tribes around Mecca, and that becomes the holy site for Muslims, he's never forgotten that Jerusalem was the first place that Muslims prayed towards. And so that's why Jerusalem is really holy. The other reason is because that's to do with this Al-Aqsa, this Al-Aqsa Mosque. Because there's a Muslim tradition that Muhammad goes to this place, Al-Aqsa, goes to this place on the edge and goes up to heaven, and he debates with God and with Moses and with Jesus about how many times a day Muslims should pray, and comes down with the answer of 5. And that scene, according to Muslim tradition, takes place here on the Temple Mount, which becomes known as Al-Aqsa, Al-Aqsa. And so when the Muslims in the 690s started to build on the Temple Mount, after Omar ibn Khattab had conquered Jerusalem, they built the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because it's on the edge of the Temple Mount, marking the place where Muhammad goes to this place on the edge. And then they build the Dome of the Rock over here, because the Dome of the Rock, it's not actually a mosque, it's a shrine. They build a shrine to Solomon. It's meant to look just like the Temple of Solomon, but with a bit of a Muslim twist as well. And so that's why this place is holy for Muslims, and that's why it is built. That's why the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock were built here by Muslims, and that it's not Jewish looking. But what is interesting is when Herod builds, first of all, let's go back in time a little bit. This is what the Temple Mount looks like. When you get rid of everything else, I strip down everything, all the buildings, you have this mountain that's over here. Everything that's down below, this is the original core of Jerusalem. This is the Jerusalem of King David. Just this part that's over here. Then Solomon expands the city by going up, 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 and building the temple. But when Herod builds the temple, he says, I don't want to build a little temple on the top of the hill. I want to build the biggest building in the whole Roman Empire, but there isn't enough space on this little tiny hill. So he builds these huge, massive walls. Well, he doesn't build them. He gets a lot of his slaves to build them. So he gets all of his slaves to build all of these big, massive walls to go all the way around the mountain. Now, why does he build all these walls? How does that make the mountain bigger? Now that's a great question. It makes the mountain bigger because when you fill in all that area, all of a sudden you've made the mountain twice, 3 times as big as what it was before. And where we're standing right now is on this corner that's over here, where the Dome of the Rock is. That golden dome is right in the middle. It's over here, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque is over here. And we're standing right over there. Now, in order to build that kind of a thing, in order to build this, in order to make all this supported, you need to build arches underneath. Arches underneath to support the whole platform. And when the Crusaders came in the year 1099, and they see what's underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they see these huge arches, these huge vaults. They say, wow, those vaults are incredible. This must have been where King Solomon kept his horses. And they call it Solomon's Stables. But it wasn't built by Solomon, and he didn't keep his horses there. But the Crusaders, when they came to Jerusalem in the year 1099, they turned the Dome of the Rock into a church and the Al-Aqsa Mosque into a palace. And a king always has his horses. So the king kept his horses in the stables. In order to make it connected to King Solomon, they call this area King Solomon's Stables. And to this day, that's what it's called, even though it was built by Roman arches, right? It's built by King Herod. And there's all these places underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque that have Jewish-built pillars and Jewish-built walls that are underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And this is what some of it looks like now, some of it which has actually been turned into a mosque underneath. These stairs lead into the mosque that is underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's the second mosque that's there. But this is what it originally looked like, the southern wall of the Temple Mount, you would have originally come up like this through these gates called Sha'arei Hulda. And from the outside, nowadays, it looks like this. These are the gates from the outside. If any of you have been to the southern wall of the Temple Mount, that's the southern wall that's over there. So on the other side of the southern wall, nowadays it looks like this, but 2,000 years ago, it would have looked like this. And this is where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is now, where you see these big red roofs over there, which used to be like a JCC. It was like a school and a courthouse and a whole bunch of other fun things. And now I'm going to jump ahead with you to a special gate that's in Jerusalem, which is called the Golden Gate. And this gate that's over here is equally holy to Jews, Muslims, and Christians, because what first started as a Jewish tradition. And the Jewish tradition is that when the Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, the Mashiach is going to come from that holy cemetery, Mount of Olives, and come up the Temple Mount through this gate. And then once the Mashiach goes through this gate, that will be the beginning of the new age of the Geula, the redemption. And once that tradition started, so Christians said, oh, well, this is also the gate that Jesus came through when Jesus came to visit 2,000 years ago to the Temple Mount. And so once it's a holy place for Jews and a holy place for Christians, so Muslims also say, oh, well, when the end of days comes, when the final days of the world are going to be here, this is where Muhammad and Jesus and Moses will all sit at this gate and judge the people together. But there's one problem. The Jewish tradition of the Mashiach coming to these gates is met by, if we're coming from the outside of the Temple Mount, it's met by a huge wall over here. You can see these arches used to be a gate where people used to be able to walk through, but now you can't do it. It's all walled up. You can see this is the cemetery, the Mount of Olives, where the Mashiach is meant to come down over here and walk up over here and go right through the gate, but it's going to be a problem because there's these walls here. What happened? Well, in the 1500s, the Muslims didn't like this tradition of a Mashiach, a Jewish Mashiach coming and wreaking havoc and starting this new age, and all of a sudden the Jews are going to take over. So they walled up the Golden Gate. But that only made the Jewish tradition feel even greater, because when Mashiach comes, he's not just or he or she is not just going to walk through the gate of the Golden Gate, but the Mashiach will be able to just burst through the gates, explode the walls of the Golden Gates. But what's really cool is that we can actually go inside the gates. And inside the gates, there's another holy site. There's a mosque. Because again, this place is equally holy to Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike. And we get to actually go inside here, where up until a year and a half ago, no one was allowed inside the gates. But now, because there was like local protests by the Muslims of Jerusalem to open it up so that they could pray in this place. That's really cool. We get to actually go inside the Golden Gate. Now, there's a whole bunch of other things I want to show you. One is that the picture didn't show up. 1 second, let me see. Oh, there we go. The picture did show up just a second ago. Boop. There we go. So we're now on the southern part of the Temple Mount. Let's just go. I'll show you a diagram of where we are. Oh, that's not the diagram of where we are. This is the diagram of where we are. Exactly. So if we look at the way that the Beit HaMikdash, the temple would have looked 2,000 years ago under the Temple of Herod, it would have looked like this. Where we're standing is up where this fortress was, that was on the northwest corner. Where the Kotel is, the western wall, the holiest site for Jews, is this little pink strip that's over here. But you'll notice there's a huge, massive western wall. It's not just the little pink strip that we call the Kotel. And there's a huge, massive southern wall, and a huge, massive eastern wall, and a huge, massive northern wall. And all of these things still exist today. It's a bit of a myth. There's an idea that the Temple Mount, or the Western Wall, the Kotel, is the only remaining wall from the destruction of the Romans in the year 70. But all of the walls are still there. It's that the Western Wall is the closest place to the Kodesh HaKodeshim that Jews are able to get to, that they're able to pray to. And this is the place where for 2,000 years, when Jews were not allowed to go up to the Temple Mount, like where we are right now on the virtual tour, Jews were not allowed to go up for most of the last 2,000 years. But So that's why the holiness, in a way, from the Kodesh HaKodashim, from where that golden dome is just over here, it in a way shifts down to where the Western Wall is now. And now, in a way, that has become like the holiest site for Jews. Another really fun story I want to show you is that all around the Temple Mount, there are all these little funny looking domes. And I'm going to show you a bunch of them. But this one over here is my favorite of all of them, even though it might be the ugliest of all of them. Now, this dome that's over here is known as the Dome of Solomon. And we don't exactly know when it was built, but it was probably built in the 12th century, so around 900 years ago. And when it was built, there was a really cool Muslim tradition about why it was built in that spot. And the tradition goes as follows, that according to Muslim tradition, when the first temple was destroyed in 586 BCE by the Babylonians, there were some Jews that took with them some stones from that original temple, from that original Beit HaMikdash. And they brought it with them to Bavel, they brought it with them to Babylon. And when they brought it back with them, 70 years later, when they went to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash again, they brought those stones back. And according to the Muslim tradition, this dome over here inside protects a few of those stones that were used in the first Beit HaMikdash. And once that became a Muslim tradition, so then Jews said, well, it's a great Muslim tradition, it's also a good Jewish tradition then too. And we're gonna tag along with that tradition as well. And so it's now a Jewish tradition and a Muslim tradition. And once it's a Muslim tradition and a Jewish tradition, so it's a Christian tradition as well. So this is where some of the stones of the first temple reside. Does anyone have any questions so far before we move on to the next part? Okay, great. So again, feel free to type in the chat if you have a question, and I'm happy to answer anything. Or you can jump up, you can step off of mute if you want to. This over here is a pool. Sorry, I'll just show you, sorry, just to go back a little bit. So some of you, next time you go to Israel, you might go on a tour of the Western Wall tunnel tours, the Kotel tunnel tours, which take you all along the Kotel, all along the Western Wall, all the way until the northern part of the Western Wall. And the climax, the end of the tour, is that you get to go to see these pools that were built in order to provide water for the Beit HaMikdash. And you can still see them to this day that are still filled with natural water. This is the end of the Western Wall tunnel tours. You can see that were used for storage afterwards. Michael, can you just make sure that everyone's on mute, just because I hear a little bit of action? Okay, great. So let's actually go up to the Temple Mount itself. We're here. We're on the Temple Mount. Oh yes. How did you get these pictures? Sorry, I didn't answer that before. The pictures are available. These are all on Google. Like the images that I show you, like this is from Google Earth, from Google Street View. The images that I show you like this, these are ones that either I took or that I found online. So what am I showing you right now? We're looking at the Golden Dome of the Rock. Where this is the place where, according to Jewish tradition, this is where the Beit HaMikdash, the first Beit HaMikdash and the second Beit HaMikdash were. It's above the holiest site in all of Judaism. But before we go inside there, I want to show you some of these cool places all around us. So one of the cool places is this dome that's over here. Now this dome was originally built by the Crusaders in the 11th century. So in the 12th century, in the 1100s. So it's built a really long time ago, and it was built as a place for, remember before I showed you how for Muslims, they wash their feet before they go into a mosque, before they go to pray. So for a lot of Christians, they need to either wash their hands or sometimes go have what's called a baptism or pour water on their head. It depends on the different types of traditions that you have. And so usually outside of a church, there'll always be a little bit of a water source as well. So outside of the church that was the Dome of the Rock when it was a church, they had a baptismal pool. They had a pool that had water. And then after it was a baptismal pool, when the Muslims come and conquer again in 1187, so they turned that into a holy site for Muslims, where all of a sudden, this dome, which was so beautiful, becomes part of Muslim tradition, that it's from this dome, from this spot, that Muhammad went up to heaven to have that debate about how many times a day people should pray. And the first time that he prays is in this little dome, the closest one to the Dome of the Rock itself. So this is according to Muslim tradition. And if you look really closely at the top of that thing that's over there, the top of the dome, it's got a really cool design to it, where each of the little tiny knobbly things that you see on the top of those mini pillars are different animals, each of them being a different animal, coming from the Crusader period, like a Gothic style. And then the last place I want to show you before we get even closer to the Temple Mount is this dome that's over here. Now this dome is another really special one. Now it's called the Cubot al-Luach. Now why is it called the Cubot al-Luach? So Cubot means the dome. Now al-Luach, that's in Arabic, but what does it sound like in Hebrew? What word do you might hear in Hebrew? You might hear the word like luach, or like luchot habrit. What are the luchot habrit? Luchot habrit are the tablets, right? Like we just had Pesach, where it's like Shnayim yodeya, Shnayim ani yodeya, Shnei luchot habrit. Like two are the tablets of the law, and one is Hashem, right? So this has a name called the Cubot al-Luach, the Dome of the Tablets. Why does it get this name, Dome of the Tablets? It's a really weird name. So all these historians started to look at what's special about this. So why does it get the name Dome of the Tablets? Well, if you look down below, you'll see that there's no floor tiles, but it's actually exposed rock. This is the only place other than inside the Golden Dome that we're going to go to in just a second, I promise. It's the only place other than inside that Golden Dome that there's exposed bedrock. There's actually exposed mountain under this dome. And so that started a new theory that maybe, just maybe, the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh HaKodashim, wasn't actually here, but maybe it was a little bit further up north. Maybe it was actually over here. And that name, Cubot al-Luach, in Arabic, was preserving a previous tradition, a Jewish tradition, that maybe the Holy of Holies, either the Temple of Solomon or the Temple of Herod, was actually here and not in the Golden Dome. So we don't actually know 100% for sure because both temples were completely destroyed. So we can only go by the history of these names of places. And then another interesting thing about it is that this dome over here sits at the perfect line between the peak of the Mount of Olives, the Holy Cemetery where the Mashiach comes from, stands in a perfect east-west line between the peak and the Temple Mount and the rest of the old city that's over there. So it's got this perfect line. It's got a really nice symmetry to it. So who knows? Maybe, it's a minority opinion, maybe that is the place. And then some other really cool looks at other fun places on the Temple Mount. Oh man, we're still not inside the Golden Dome. I want to go inside the Golden Dome already. You're just gonna have to wait for another little bit. Now, before we go inside, I want to show you another really fun one, another little fun dome, which is this one over here, which is called the Cubot al-Sisla. Now, the Cubot al-Sisla is the weirdest of all the buildings, which is, sorry, I don't know why that picture didn't load up. 1 second. Oh, the picture didn't load up, but it's not a big deal. It actually has 11 sides to this. Here we go. So the Cubot al-Sisla has 11 sides. Now, if we were going regularly, if we were going up to the Temple Mount in person, we would actually be able to, weren't there maps or diagrams of the temple so we can know where it was? We don't actually have exact maps or diagrams. Definitely of the first temple, we don't have anything. From the second temple, we don't have maps. We have descriptions from different people about what it was. And there is kind of evidence on the ground of where things were. We generally know where things were in the second temple. But for the first temple, we don't know anything. So this Cubot al-Sisla is a really strange dome that, again, no one knows why it was built. But what is cool about it is that even though some people think it might have been a bank, some people think it might have been a workshop, some people think it might have been a model for how they built the Dome of the Rock, but all those theories are not really good theories. The only good theory about it is that this spot, this Cubot al-Sisla, sits in the exact geometric center of that rectangle of the Temple Mount. The Golden Dome, the Dome of the Rock, actually sits a little bit further to the west. Part of the reason why the Western Wall, the Kotel, is holier to Jews than any of the other walls is because the Western Wall is the side that's closest to the Dome of the Rock itself. Because this spot over here is the geometric center, while the Dome of the Rock, the Golden Dome, is a little bit further to the west. Just to show you a little bit about what used to be here. This is an artist's rendition of what the small but very beautiful temple of Shlomo used to look like. Where again, it was very small, but it would have been potentially in that spot that's over there. This is the much bigger version of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, which was built by Herod in the year 20 BCE. This is again to just zoom out a little bit to see what the whole complex looks like. And again, we started over here, and then we went inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was over here, and then we were up here, and then we went over to a gate over here, and then we went over to this corner over here, and then we were on this part of the platform over here, and now we're standing right over here. Now remember, the geometric center is actually kind of this spot over here, and not exactly where the Kodesh Kodeshim was. So this is what the temple in the second temple period looked like. But dome actually, when it was first built in the year 690, now this building that's over here that I'm showing you, which again you can see again in front of you this way or like this. So this building is actually the oldest Muslim building in the whole world that has survived in its entirety. It was built in 690 and it was unaffected by any of the earthquakes that Jerusalem had. Even though Al-Aqsa Mosque was built first, the Dome of the Rock, the Golden Dome, is the only one that survived because the Al-Aqsa Mosque is supported by those arches. So when an earthquake comes, whoa, it's a lot more wobbly. But when the Dome of the Rock was built, it's built on bedrock. So it's a lot more stable. Now, you'll notice that this picture has a black dome, and the one that we're seeing over here has a gold dome. Well, what happened? In the 1960s, there was a man, the person who turned it gold, there's a renovation that was done on the Dome of the Rock, and the renovation was done by, some parents the name might mean a little bit more, but done by Osama bin Laden's father, who was a really big architectural Muslim philanthropist and developer in the Muslim world. And so he plated the Dome of the Rock to be gold, even though it used to always be black. And just to show you the earliest drawing that we have of the Temple Mount actually comes from the Crusaders, or the Knights Templar, the famous knights of the Crusader period. Part of their seal was the Cubot al-Sisla, because they were so amazed by the architecture of it. And the Knights Templar, these knights got their name because their base was in the Temple of Solomon, which they thought that the Dome of the Rock was the Temple of Solomon. All right, let's go inside already. Let's see what all the big fuss is all about. Let's see the holiest site in all of Judaism. Let's see what it looks like inside. So this is the site. We're sitting at the ground level of it, and we're going to start from going up to the top, and then we're going to see from above what it looks like. So if you look at this image, oh man, the image is taking a bit long to come up. Oh no, still that one not coming up again too. This one's not coming up again either. Oh, what's happening? All right, well, we're just going to have to wait for it to load. It'll just take a quick second, I promise. Is there any questions up until now so far? So you can see what's over here. So inside here, it's actually not a mosque. So it's inside, it's carpeted, but it's not generally used for prayer. What's used for prayer is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This over here actually isn't really used as a mosque so much. Some people can pray, but it's not really used as a mosque. Now, oh man, it's still not loading. One second, let me just give it another try. I'm gonna skip ahead to the scene ahead of us, and then go backwards, and see if this works. And if not, then I'll refresh the page. Oh man, why is it being slow? I'm really sorry, everyone. 1 second. Jews have access to inside the Dome of the Rock today? No, Jews do not have access to inside the Dome of the Rock today. Only Muslims are allowed to go inside the Dome of the Rock. And the reason being, because of that deranged terrorist, that man who burnt down the Minbar from before, because of that, that's why no non-Muslims are allowed inside. Oh, I'm really sorry that this is taking a bit of time to load up, everyone. Hold on, let's go out and go back in. Let me just try to refresh it. Really sorry, everyone. Just give it 1 second. Sorry, maybe I'm My internet is just slowing down for some reason. All right, this will just take a quick second. Does anyone have any questions so far while we're paused here? So right, so non-Jews are not allowed to go inside, or sorry, non-Muslims are not allowed to go inside the Dome of the Rock, which is another reason why, well, the Kotel ends up becoming that holy site. So let's see if this works. I'm really sorry that this is delaying us a little bit. We need to go to inside the Dome of the Rock. There we go, looks a lot faster now. Oh man, the images still didn't pop up. Okay, we'll just wait for another second. Maybe it'll pop up in just a quick second. So inside the Dome of the Rock, again, you have this really beautiful interior that was done by, in the Ottoman period, so in the 1500s, where the building remained the same, but the interior design, all the fancy patterns and everything were done during the Ottoman period to help combine. Oh, is access closed to everybody now during COVID-19? Yes, it is. Here we go, here's the image. We're again looking at the beautiful geometric patterns on the inside. The Golden Dome is the most spectacular image of Jerusalem that you can always get, like when we're on a helicopter shot, but from the interior, it is even more beautiful. And only Muslims get to see what's inside. But when we're on a virtual tour, we also get to go see inside. And so you can see the gorgeous, stunning geometric patterns that's on that side, combining Ottoman styles and Persian styles, and sorry, my little baby Mayan is crying in the background, and Persian styles as well as Babylonian styles as well, to unite all the different Muslim geographies where people are from. Are there any excavations going on these days on or beneath the Temple Mount? At least until COVID-19 these days. That's a really good question. I'm going to get into that at the end. This is what the Dome of the Rock looks. This is what the rock of the Dome of the Rock looks like. Now, for Jews, this is the site where the Holy of Holies was. This is the holy rock where the Holy of Holies, where only the Kohen Gadol could go to once a year. And you can see it doesn't look like much. It's a rock that's been hacked away 1,000,000 times over. And as you can see from this image over here, there's kind of floodlights and cables that run over it. And it's kind of funny looking in that kind of way. So it's hacked away because of 2,000 years of Christian and Muslim tourists who wanted to bring, something back home with them of this holy rock, of this holy stone, which according to Jewish tradition, this is the place where the sacrifice of Isaac took place. This is the rock that began the world. When God was creating the world, that he created the world from this spot over here and where the two temples once stood. But there's a funny tradition that came about, which is underneath the rock. Now, underneath the rock, you have this cave. And it's mostly this natural cave. You get a better view of it from this image over here, which is from 1883, this drawing that's over here. Well, what's funny about this cave? When the Crusaders came in 1099, they saw this cave to be the holy site of the Holy of Holies. Even though Jews, we knew that the Holy of Holies was in a building on top of a rock. But for Christians in churches, for Catholics, the holiest site in a church is always underneath the bima, underneath where the priest gives mass, where all the action takes place. Underneath is what's called the crypt, where there's something underneath that is a holy relic, something that was buried underneath that the church is built on. And so they started a tradition that the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, was actually underneath the rock. And so once the Christians started that tradition, so then Muslims and Jews tacked on to that tradition as well. And for hundreds of years, this cave over here was the place for Jewish tradition where the Holy of Holies once was. Even though nowadays we don't really believe that, but it was a tradition that lasted for hundreds of years. And again, it's another view of the Dome of the Rock. We're back outside the Dome of the Rock. You can see the Al-Aqsa Mosque that's over here. For all of you students, all of you guys who are 13 or 12 years old, there's a really famous building that's just over here on this corner of the Temple Mount that's called Cubot al-Hawiye, which in Arabic means the grammar dome, because this is the oldest school built by the Ayyubids, which is the group of people that conquered the Temple Mount under the Salah ad-Din in 1987. It's built in 1207, and it's one of the oldest schools in the whole Middle East that now doesn't serve as a school anymore. Sorry that the image isn't popping up again, but it's okay, it's not that important. the last thing I wanted to show you over here is we're now at the Western Wall itself, where you can see this really beautiful tower, this really beautiful minaret, which is the main minaret that does the call to prayer for all of the old city of Jerusalem. And it's the most visible one for us because the minaret is this one that's over here. Whenever we go visit the Kotel, we always see this minaret in the background, as well as the Dome of the Rock, which when this picture was taken, it wasn't gold, it was still a black dome. And this over here is what the plaza nowadays is, where back then there was a neighborhood called the Mughrabi neighborhood. Now, back when there was the Mughrabi neighborhood, it made it very hard for Jews to go to that part of the Western Wall. And so the place where Jews used to go is actually really this one that's over here, where it's not by that minaret where the Western Wall is today, where we go to for the Kotel today, but have actually been closer in this area over here, which is a place you can still visit today called the Kotel HaKatan. And that's really the place that for 2,000 years, Jews used to go pray to. And I'm gonna finish with you guys and then open the floor for questions. But before I do that, I wanna show you again a view that you can go to, which is outside of the Temple Mount, which is on the top of a place called the Austrian Harvest, where you get a really beautiful view of the whole old city of Jerusalem, where you can see one second, this dome over here is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest site in all of Christianity. You can see the Jewish quarter off in the distance over here, or the Chorva synagogue, the big white dome of the Chorva synagogue. You can see the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque over here, the third holiest site in all of Islam, and the holiest site for Jews in the world as well. And all of that from a rooftop in the old city of Jerusalem, where you can see all of it all together. And again, this is an older view of what Jerusalem used to look like. And this is a more modern view of Jerusalem. And what I like to end with, especially with you guys being from Canada, from Toronto, is there's a famous song called One Tin Soldier, which your parents can definitely play for you at home. I grew up with at camp, which definitely isn't about the Temple Mount, but for me, whenever I give this tour, whenever I think about the Temple Mount, I always think of the song One Tin Soldier. Because if you look at the lyrics where it says, listen children to a story that was written long ago, right? This is an ancient temple, about a kingdom on a mountain and the valley folk below, right? The kingdom, this is the kingdom of God, this is the holy site. And the valley folk below, we're talking about a thing that was on the mountain and everyone down below in the original city of Jerusalem. And on the mountain was a treasure buried deep beneath the stone. We saw the stone where that treasure was. And the valley people swore they'd have it for their very own. So there's all these different groups of people that have come through Jerusalem that have tried to lay claim to some part of that holy stone. And the valley people swore they'd have it for their very own. And ultimately, there's this battle that takes place between the people of the valley and the kingdom, and everyone, in a way, gets killed, and it's this terrible, terrible war, and it's an awful feeling in that way. But the treasure that was underneath all along was this message that said peace on earth. And Jerusalem means Yerushalayim, or from Yerushalayim. One of the translations of the word Yerushalayim means Ir Shalom, a city of peace. And even though it's ironic in a way, it's a city that never really saw much peace. It's a city that for thousands and thousands of years, people have been fighting over. And really the treasure of Jerusalem, in my mind, isn't anything that's underneath the Dome of the Rock over here. It isn't anything that has to do with the Al-Aqsa, the Al-Aqsa Mosque that's over here, or anything to do with the Temple Mount or anything that's all around us. The real message of Jerusalem is that when you go to the Temple Mount, there's all these places where Jews, Muslims, and Christians have traditions that go together. And the Temple Mount shouldn't be a place where we are driven apart and fighting over for a little slab of rock to call our own, but it can be a place where we can all come together and share traditions together. And that's really my message at the end of the day for all of you guys. And I hope that you enjoyed the tour of Jerusalem and of the Temple Mount. Before I open up the floor for questions to everyone, I'll just spotlight. I don't know if I can spotlight over here. No, I guess I don't know how to do that. Spotlight video. Great. So I'm just going to spotlight it on myself for a quick second. And I just wanted to thank you guys so much for participating and for being a part of all of this. I'm going to write in the chat for all of you guys. I'm going to write in the chat my email address, which is josh@hartuvetours.com, where any questions you have about anything in Israel or anytime you might want to do any sort of tour in general in Israel, you can feel free to contact me. If you just want me to show you cool pictures, I'm happy to send you cool pictures. If you're looking for something interesting to talk about for your bar bat mitzvah and you want, you know, a little bit of help with something connecting it to Israel, please send me an email. I'm really happy to do that for you guys. As well, I would love it if you guys could go to my page on TripAdvisor or on Facebook and leave a review. On Facebook, it's at Hartuv Tours. On TripAdvisor, it's just search for Hartuv Tours on TripAdvisor, and you can leave reviews of the Temple Mount tour there. And that way it spreads the word that people might want to do this kind of thing again. And once again, thank you all so much. I had the most lovely time with you all. And I'm happy to open up the floor to questions. I see one already from Tzvi. What entrance do Muslims use to get up to the Temple Mount? The entrance they use is all of them. There's actually, I'll show you, let's go back into over here, because now there'll be a bunch of questions. So this is the entrance that tourists are allowed to go up to over here. But there's an entrance over here, another entrance over here, another entrance over here, two entrances on this side. There's actually a school that's over here where Muslim kids have recess in this area where there's all the green grass and all the trees over there. So Muslims go in anytime they want, as long as it's daylight. They can go up anytime they want through any entrance that they want. The rest of it is closed off for all non-Muslims, and it's protected by the Israeli police, are the ones who protect it from non-Muslims to go in. Any other questions so far? Any other questions? And feel free to take yourselves off mute if you want to. Corey says, I feel really connected to Israel even if I'm not there physically. That's really sweet. That's really nice. I feel, in a way, I feel like I'm not even in Israel because I've been at home all this time. And so I feel like I'm really far away from Israel, even though I'm already here. And so, yeah, so thank you all so much for joining. And again, feel free to take yourselves off mute if you want to, and you can ask a question, or I hope you all have a really nice rest of your day. For me, it's nighttime already. My baby is already crying as she's trying to go to sleep. And so, yeah, so thank you all. I had a really great time, and I hope it has added to your bar and bar mitzvah experience. So thank you. All right. So no more questions from anyone? There's a lot of crazy stuff that all this was. I know it was really overwhelming. I'll post the contact info again to everyone. I see
there was one question, Josh. How do they know who's allowed in or not? How do they check Muslim, non-Muslim?
How do they check? So they check, one way that you can check, well, first of all, there's kind of racial discrimination in a way that if you don't look like you're Muslim, then they won't let you up through one of those entrances or into the mosques. But if that still doesn't work and you insist that you're Muslim and they really don't believe you, they'll ask you to say what's called the Surah Fatiha, which means like the opening prayer, which for Muslims is like saying the Shema. Like every Jew knows how to say the Shema. So they'll ask if you're pretending or if you're wanting to be Muslim and go into one of the mosques, so you have to say this Surah Fatiha, which means the opening surah, the opening chapter of the Quran, which is the most famous one, which is the one that is used for, like the Shema for Muslims. Okay. Are there any other questions from any of you guys? Next year in Jerusalem, Amen. Amen. All right, well, I hope to maybe see you guys again. And yeah, just I would really, really love it if you guys left a review, again, either on Facebook or on TripAdvisor. You can, if you had a good time and you took a few screenshots, you can tag me on Instagram as well, all of it at Hartuv Tours. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of other tours that I've been creating as well. And feel free to tell Beth David more and more that you want to do more tours. And there's all these other different options like Jaffa, like going into the Negev, and all these other really fun places that we can do together. So feel free to just ask. And that's all I ask of you guys. So thank you all so much for the opportunity one more time, and sending love from Tel Aviv to all of you.
Thanks so much, Josh.
Thank you, Michael.